Welcome to Adventure Thinking, an intimate series of live video podcasts that explores the mindset born from challenge, adversity, and living a life of no regrets. I'm Jonesy, your host, and for the past 20 years, I have been lucky to have embarked on some crazy expeditions.
And I'm Lauren, your other host, and I haven't.
And returned transformed, with some pretty epic tales to share.
I'm more of an accidental adventurer.
You just start to question why you're doing it.
Each week, I'll be bringing adventure stories
We'll be bringing
and mindsets down from the proverbial mountaintop as we dive into the hearts and minds of some of the world's greatest adventurers. These are people that have achieved truly phenomenal undertakings against all odds and have returned better for it. So, do you want to live more adventurously? This is Adventure Thinking.
All right, Ben, Lauren's just realized that the dishwasher's on, so it just went off. So we'll just keep it rolling, and then we'll cut that off. Ollie, move. All right. Actually, I might keep that in, Lauren. What just happened?
the washing machine was going.
Okay, again.
And then Ollie took my spot, our dog.
Yeah, our dog. So it's another episode of Adventure Thinking Live. Well, actually, this one's not live. This is our first episode not live. And we've got a pretty bloody exciting guest on today. Now, what's going on this past week for us, though? Lauren? Anything exciting and fun or not?
I don't know about the past week. I don't even know what day it is. However, today it's 9 p.m. So it's the first time we've done an evening one. And considering my bedtime's 8 p.m., I feel like a party animal. And I have my sleepy time tea, my Ugg boots, and we're having bedtime stories with Ben, which is pretty awesome.
Bedtime stories with Ben. Ben Saunders is our guest today. And Ollie is, if you didn't know, Ollie is sitting between us. So we are on the same couch, but I will jump over to a different setup at the moment. So here we go.
So who's Ben Saunders?
Ben Saunders. Ben Saunders is
Polar
like...
Ben.
Polar Ben. He's actually
As
one...
I know him on Instagrams.
is that how he's known? He's actually one of my man crushes.
Another one.
I've got several, and Polar Ben is one of them. And I actually met Polar Ben once. Actually, we were over in England, and my dreams were it was just fantastic.
Did you have a spot of tea?
You know what? I think we did something very non-English. I think we had coffee. I think I'm gonna have to query Ben on that when we catch up. But so Ben Saunders, he's a super interesting guy. I've been following for absolutely yonks, and like literally also following him in his footsteps at times. But I want to read out his bio because it is beautiful, and everyone knows the Brits. You know, they invented the English language, so therefore they write beautiful prose and talk about themselves really well. So Ben Saunders is one of the world's leading pole explorers and a record-breaking long-distance skier who has covered more than 7,000 kilometers, that's 4,350 miles, on foot in polar regions since 2001. That's a long time ago. His accomplishments include leading the Scott Expedition, the longest human-powered polar journey in history. Like, that is a huge trip. Massive, massive, massive. He didn't write that. And the first completion of the expedition that defeated Captain Scott and Sir Ernest Shackleton, a 105-day round trip from Ross Island on the coast of Antarctica to the South Pole and back again. Ben is the third person in history to ski solo to the North and South Poles, and holds the record for the longest solo Arctic journey by a Briton. Now, I'm not going to read the rest out because I'm super excited to get him on, but his theme that he's chosen for the day is actually going to be success. Now, that's a really interesting theme, and I want to see what we dive into in this chat and what that definition of success actually means or doesn't. So I'm going to introduce Ben by showing a video.
Facing tempests of dust, I'll fight it.
Ben, welcome
Hi,
to
Ben.
Adventure Thinking. How are you, Ben?
Good, thank you. Yeah, very well. We are obviously on opposite sides of the planet. I'm in England right now, and very different time zones. It's bedtime for you guys, nearly lunchtime for me. But it's great to be here.
And it's summer for you and winter for us. So we're really.
Yeah. Theoretically, I mean, it's kind of English summer. So like it's really weird. I went for a run this morning and literally I had my top off in the sunshine. It was great.
Oh, Ben.
And now it's like dark cloud. I've got my little selfie light thing here, and the light keeps changing loads. So it's English summer right now. We got back on Saturday from my wife and I from a week in the south of France, which was fantastic. But we came back like 2 hours after this new quarantine law came into play in the UK. So we're now trapped at home for 2 weeks. So hey ho.
2 hours. 2 hours. You rue those 2
Yeah.
hours.
Did you bring some
Pretty
French
arbitrary.
wine back? Is the question everyone's asking themselves.
Annoyingly, no. We flew, but we just went like super light, hand luggage. So it didn't bring any wine or cheese. Tragically, we consumed a lot when we were down there, which was good.
That's pretty good.
Well, that sounds horrible, Ben. I'm really sorry for you. I mean,
Hard life.
sounds amazing this time of year.
That's on our bucket list, but it might have to stay there for a while because we're not going anywhere for the time being, I don't think.
Yeah, we have a little fantasy about actually living a year in sort of based over in Europe, mainly Italy and France. So we'll let you know when that happens. We'll hang out.
Cool.
We'll
Well,
get
we could do a house swap. I mean, we basically have identical dogs, so we can it'll be an easy transition.
Yes, we do. So for everyone who doesn't know what Ben's talking about, we have the same dog. Now, I was blown away. I was suffering from insomnia one late night, and I see Ben post a story about his dog, his Labradoodle called Molly. Now, we have a Labradoodle called Ollie, who's also a black Labradoodle. She's lying on the couch between us, and we thought
she's
we had to
tired.
have her for today. So I think there's something about
Polar
adventurers or
explorers
polar explorers or
and
something.
doodles.
And doodles. We're
Yeah,
compensating
and
for-
not very macho dogs.
No, it doesn't matter. I mean, like, if you need a macho dog, you're not a macho man.
Hey, she's very macho. The only thing she's afraid of is cats, Ben. Poor
Yes.
Ollie.
Well, Molly could teach Ollie if you think about I'm going to CATS. She's asleep right here next to me, so
okay.
I'm not going to say the word because she knows that word and she goes mental. But they're her kind of sworn enemy for some reason. So she
I think we
chases
should
them.
send Ollie over for some cat training, cat defense
Yeah.
training in the UK.
Okay, we'll do that. Sure.
So, Ben,
We're talking about all the important things
yeah,
today.
we've ticked off all the important things. But today, I mean, I was not surprised. Up until this point, I've actually been quite surprised by the theme that each adventure thinker has chosen. Like Jess Watson, I thought she'd talk about isolation because she sailed around the world alone, when she was 15 and 16 years old. But she talked about audacity, and it kind of kept coming up. But with you chose success. And I'm like, right, that fits because you're a multiple world record holder. You're a multiple TEDx talker.
No, I think it's just Ted.
TED talker.
It's Ted. There's no
It's
X.
Ted.
I mean, seriously,
Whoa.
he's on the big one, Lauren. I mean, like, mere peasants on the TEDx
Okay,
stage.
excuse me, sorry.
3 times?
Delete
3 times or 2 times? 3 times.
3 times.
Wow.
3 times.
All right.
So
But I have like huge like I mean the first one was 2005, and I just can't bear watching that. I'm 20. I was 25, 26. I'm just it's painful to watch. And then the most recent one was 2014, and we just got back from Antarctica, and I was naively I was like, it'll be great. It'll be the first time I've told the story, and I'll be like, I might even keep my beard, and and it just hadn't occurred to me that I would just be cool. Well, I wasn't that skinny because I've been back for about 3 weeks, so I've basically been eating nonstop. So I had like skinny arms, skinny legs, and then like proper pot belly. So
Just knows a thing or two about
all
post-
three. All 3 TED Talks I have real angst about. I kind of wish I could redo them. Anyway,
when was the last one? So you did one when you were 25.
2014, 2005 to 2012, I think it was, and 2014.
That 2014 one, I think you did a post. I saw it at the time, or you talked about it somewhere. You're like, I thought I'd be fit and all this stuff like that, having just done my trip, but your body's in starvation mode after those journeys. So you're pounding on the kilos. I put on 20 kilos in 2 weeks, and I put in 12 of that was on the first 3 days.
Ben, ask him how many white chocolate chip cookies he had at the base.
Brownies.
Sorry.
I had 32 white chocolate chip brownies. Yeah, they're fantastic in a row.
It's insane that like few weeks after those kind of trips, like one of my favorite things actually about that TED conference was the fact they put me up in a really nice hotel like right next to the venue that had this huge breakfast buffet with these just ridiculous. They had like cream-filled donuts, and just I would go nuts every morning. So that was the best bit.
Sounds ridiculous.
Well, we have TED knocking on our door too, Ben. I mean, they call us all the time, and we're just so busy. We haven't been able to get back to them. So we have yet to be on the TED stage once, but I'm sure it'll happen sometime.
Wow. Bit of much, Lauren?
Actually, I was going to say TED 2005 was I mean, it sounds like hyperbole to say it was life-changing, but it was perfect timing because I was like 25, 26, skied solo to the North Pole, was like in danger of disappearing up my own arse, and rocked up at what back then was like a very low key. It was just a conference. There was nothing online. There was no TED.com. It was just a quite exclusive, conference in those days in Monterey, California, and I rocked up there, pretty full of myself, like, I've just broken this world record, and youngest in history, And the first person I spoke to was, some nuclear physicist, and the next person I spoke to was trying to, working with the Gates Foundation to find a cure for malaria. Someone else was trying to get all the schools and health centers in Ethiopia online, and it was perfect timing because it was genuinely humbling. I was like, I've just done a camping trip. You're like, there's a lot more I could be doing, and I've totally wasted my life. But so it was really cool timing because everyone there was kind of at the forefront of their thing, whatever it was, and it was also the first like big gathering I'd been to when nobody asked me why I was doing what I was doing. There was just this kind of unspoken, I don't know, collective appreciation that was a cool thing to do, to pursue your thing, whatever it was, and one needn't question that. So it was a great experience.
I asked Justin why he would do that, and I will ask you why that you would do that in this podcast, because it does baffle me why when I met a professional adventurer, I didn't even know that thing existed when I met Justin. I mean,
you thought I was a porn star or something. I mean, that's all.
He paused and he's like, I was like, what do you do? Because he asked me and I told him, and then I was like, what do you do? And he was like, and got really awkward and almost
I told the truth for once, because normally in a situation like that, I'd just say I'm a banker or something like that, because then I know they're probably actually, I don't know.
What, you think it's attractive?
No, not attractive. It's more like, it's like, well, if they like me as a banker, then they actually really like me. That's the way I kind of figured, but maybe not.
I still think he's a banker. Anyways, so back to so what was your TED Talk on, actually, out of curiosity? Because that was the original TED where it was like really kind of invite only, secret squirrel.
Yeah.
What'd you speak on?
It was extraordinary. So I met Chris Anderson, who's the guy that runs TED, the year before, so 2004, at a really cool conference called PopTech, which back then was the US as well. So it's up in a little town called Camden in Maine. So beautiful New England. It's like a very low key TED, or it certainly was. I haven't been back there for a long time, but really, really cool event. And there was a drinks thing one evening, and and I just stood at the bar chatting to some people, and was introduced to this guy, Chris, and he was like, "Oh, my name's Chris. I run TED, and you know what? I'd spoken that day. He said we'd love to come and speak." And a few people around were like, and I was like, "What's TED? I've never heard of this." And he said, "Well." He said, well, it's once a year. It's in Monterey, California, and we're a non-profit, so we don't pay speakers, but we fly you out there. And I nearly said no, because I was broke at the time and like just starting to get into, being paid to speak. I was like, well, no way, I'm not going to speak for free. What do you think I am? And he's like, well, I'll email you, just some more details. And he emailed me a few days later. And the first speaker in their like provisional lineup for the next year's TED was James Watson, Nobel laureate, co-discoverer of DNA, and they kind of put a little slot for me in the lineup. And the next speaker after me was Bono, and then I was in this really cool like afternoon session, which was called something like the New Explorers, and they TED was so cool back then because it was they had one camera. They were filming it with like one, old VCR camera, but there was just zero production values. It was just a really cool event, really cool gathering. And go back then now, as I did in 2014, and it's like being on a Saturday night TV show. They have huge production crews and makeup and all that kind of stuff. So 2005, they just had these like sofas next to the stage that the speakers sit on, and then they just get up and speak, and then they sit back down again. And I was sat on the sofa next to this very awkward South African guy who spoke just before I did, and gave this like really rambling talk about everything from solar panels to going to Mars. And it was such a bad talk that they never put it online. I'm sure they have it in the archives, but it never went online. I mean, his name, of course, was Elon Musk. And whenever I think I've done okay for myself, since 2005, that's always a good like reality check.
That's insane.
So it was pretty cool. It was a cool event.
You guys are on par. You're fine. You're fine.
I think his speaking has come a little. His speaking's come a long way. It sounds like it from that day.
Yeah, he's had some coaching.
He's had a couple wins. He knows a thing or two about success. God, that's so interesting. Yeah. So, do you want to talk to us? I mean, you've had obviously a lot of success in your life. Do you want to kind of dive into what success means to you and share a story around the time that you felt most successful, least successful, or what success actually means?
Yeah, definitely. So I don't know. I know I sent you guys some slides, so I can give you a few a little bit of PowerPoint background, trying to explain this story. But this was the big expedition I did back in 2013, 2014. So it was in Antarctica, and I was thinking actually just before we spoke, like actually, Jonesy, you're one of very, very few people in the universe that have some sort of insight into what this trip was actually like. And people often ask, oh, well, yeah, what's the difference between doing solo expeditions and trips as part of a small team? And there are kind of pros and cons to both. And actually, the solo trips I've done are not because I'm some raving sociopathic loner, I don't think, but more because I'd always seen doing things solo as like the ultimate challenge, the ultimate test of self-reliance and that kind of stuff. So and people like Ellen MacArthur in the UK, sailing around the world and on her own, breaking records, just were kind of interesting role models. And so yes, solo kind of seemed like as high as I could aspire. And it's got a surprising amount going for it, which is that you just live to your own routine. As soon as there are two of you or more, you have to agree. Okay, we're going to wake up at 6. We're going to start skiing at 8. We're going to stop every 90 minutes. You only travel as fast as the slowest person, and so on. You have to have some kind of ground rules in the tent. There's normally some like unspoken kind of dividing line down the middle of whose territory is whose, and woe betide the person that gets his stinking foot on the other person's sleeping bag, or whatever it is. But solo, you can do what you like. But I think the hardest thing about traveling solo is that there's no one there to share it with you, and nobody will ever know what it was like. And that probably applies more to the North Pole and the Arctic Ocean, because it's such a weird environment. You're traveling over the sea, over the frozen surface of the Arctic Ocean. So there are no maps, and the terrain, these crazy sort of ice scapes that you're navigating, change from 1 hour to the next, and every day it looks completely different. And every day you're seeing scenery, stunning scenery that no one else has ever seen in that particular configuration, and no one else will ever see again. So you can spend weeks and weeks on planet Earth seeing scenery that is totally unique to you, and trying to explain that to someone that doesn't, is just incredibly frustrating. So having at least one other human being with you that just knows what happens, knows what it was like, is magical. So so I was thinking, Jonesy, like you're kind of by association, you've done a stupidly long trip as well in Antarctica with one other person. So you know what it was like.
You beat me on distance there, Ben. You beat me on distance.
Well, marginally, yeah. So let's show some slides. So this was 2013, 2014. I was traveling with a great friend of mine called Tarka Le Pena. Tarka I'm not supposed to divulge this in public, but he was either conceived or born in Devon in the UK. And there's a story called Tarka the Otter. I don't know if that's made for Australia, but it was a kind of cool kids book. So he was named after Tarka the Otter. Le Pinier, he's half French, obviously. So cool name, very cool guy, and old friend of mine. And I convinced him to come down to Antarctica with me super early in the season. So we started this trip in October 2013. So it was still miserably cold. And our plan in a nutshell was to walk from Ross Island, which is on the kind of New Zealand side of Antarctica, to the South Pole, where we turn around and walk all the way back again. And we wanted to do that because no one had done that. And also it was a journey that had a lot of historical significance. It was the route that, was originally kind of pioneered by Captain Scott, and then by Shackleton on his Nimrod expedition, and then finally on the route on which Captain Scott died in early 1912, having covered, and I don't know what it is in metric, 1,600 miles roughly. So the idea, to me, the idea that the sort of the high watermark of kind of human endeavor had been set in 1912 and no one had surpassed it just seemed extraordinary. So Charles and I went down there to try and finish this journey, and we were traveling on foot, as you can see, dragging everything behind us, so 200 kilos each, which is ridiculous. I mean, Jones, you know what it's like. It's kind of the same as pulling two fairly fat blokes in a bathtub each through sand. So kind of slow, frustrating progress. And if we skip the next slide.
Decently fat.
Yeah. Can you stick the next slide up? Sorry, I think we were talking over each other then. You're in charge. There we go. So and Antarctica is a kind of weird place. I think a lot of people's kind of conceptions of it are based on, these, certainly in the BBC, we have all these Attenborough documentaries, and there's, Frozen Planet and March of the Penguin, there's Life in the Freezer, all that kind of stuff. And you'd be forgiven for thinking that it's overrun with penguins, which it is definitely not. So we started our journey by walking across the Ross Ice Shelf, which is about the same size as France or California, except there's nothing going on at all. It's just this kind of featureless flat ice shelf. So we walked for, I think it was about 28 days, 4 weeks in a roughly straight line, in scenery that didn't change. I mean, that was the view, 10, 11, 12 hours a day. And we'd finish each day at somewhere that looked exactly the same as where we started from. And that's when the weather's good. Can you see the next slide up? We had a lot of this stuff, whiteout, so really poor visibility, and it's pretty miserable. Next slide. We finally, at the end of the Ross Ice Shelf, got to the Transantarctic Mountain Range. We travelled up the Beardmore Glacier. Do you say glacier or glacier in Australia?
We say glacier.
Glacier. Tomato. Okay. The Beardmore Glacier. Anyway, one of the largest valley glaciers on Earth. It was wonderful because we had scenery suddenly. It took us like a week to walk up it. Complete change of terrain as well. You can see it's the glacier is covered mostly in blue ice, so there's thick glacial ice, and it's so windy that the snow doesn't settle, so you get this polished rock hard surface. So we had crampons on. There's very little friction with the sledges, so it's kind of easy going ish, but it's covered in crevasses, so it's pretty sketchy, and we didn't have a lot of data to go on. So this is Tarka clutching a piece of 1965 US Geological Survey map, trying to pick a best route. Next slide, please. And then we popped out the top, Antarctic Plateau, kind of recurring theme here, flat, white, featureless for another 3 weeks or so, I think it was. And then finally, next slide, made it to the South Pole. Now, when you get there from the New Zealand side, you kind of go through the sort of backyard of the Amundsen Scott Base. So it was a sort of weird, ultimate anticlimax. I don't know how you guys found it, but for us, like the pole is on the far side of that, what looks like a junkyard, and it felt like a junkyard. There's a lot of stuff at the South Pole, and it feels like something out of like you could very easily shoot the next Mad Max film there without needing to invest an awful lot in props and scenery. It's a kind of weird place, and for us, having seen nothing man-made for 2 months by this point, it was a bit of a shock. And there's a lot of noise and vehicles driving around, aircraft coming in and out, and lots of rules, or lots of coming in again from the sort of backyard side of it. We had to steer around all these different, the runway, and then there's this big clear clear air zone for scientific research. So we had all these sort of detours to get to the pole. Next slide, please. And that is the pole. And you know it well. Kind of weird place. And for us, it was halfway, and we didn't want to hang around. We'd also done this ridiculously long day. So we basically left the tent up with our sledges, thinking, well, it'll be an easy. It was like a 40K round trip, we thought, not taking into account all the ridiculous detours we had to do at the base. So by the time we got back to our tent, it was like 2 or 3 in the morning on our local time. It was 24-hour daylight, so it doesn't really matter. But we did, I forget what it was, 50 something, 53, 56K. I don't know. It was just a ridiculously long day. So anyway, turn around the pole. Next slide, please. And started heading back. And this is where things got really grim. Like we were kind of counting on things getting better after we turned around. We'd been walking into the wind for 2 months and we left 10 depots, buried 10 cases of food and fuel on the way out. And we left the last depot quite a long way from the pole, thinking, well, it'll be midsummer, the weather will be great, the sledges will be empty, we'll be flying along, mentally we'll have broken the back of the journey, we'll be turning around, heading for home, we should have the wind behind us. And like none of these things happened. Like the weather just turned really bad. It was really grim, really cold, really poor visibility, really windy. And we started running low on food. We kind of realized that we were going to run out of food before we got to the first depot we laid. So to cut a very long story short, we essentially called for help. We called for an airdrop of food, which compromised the kind of status of the expedition. It meant that we were no longer unsupported or unassisted, whatever term you want to use. And it kind of felt like failure at the time, having food dropped off. But now looking back a few years later, I still think one of my proudest decisions, and I might come back later if I remember. Next slide, please. But we traveled on half rations for I think about 10 days, 2 weeks maybe, and it was a pretty effective weight loss plan. So I often wonder if we actually put weight on again after we had the food dropped off. But this was just before our resupply. That's Tarka looking pretty skinny. It's a special occasion, obviously, because he's changing his underwear, which didn't happen very much. But we lost a lot of weight. Like he lost 25 kilos. I think I lost 22 in 3.5 months. Next slide, please. And this is heading back down to the coast. This is sort of going back down the Beardmore Glacier. And Tarka, I think, is trying to repair his crampons there. They kept falling apart. And one of the hardest things to do with Antarctica is kind of explain the scale of this place. Like the Beardmore was just vast. Like I think it took us another 2 or 3 days to get to the horizon, the sort of mouth of the glacier. Next slide, please. And this is down near the bottom. So we had on the way up a lot of big, obvious, open, massive crevasses that we had a lot where there was obviously a lot of wind, a lot of snow while we're up in plateaus. When we came down, there were a lot of fresh snow bridges. So you can kind of see on the left, this photograph to the left of me, like these sort of sagging dips in the snow. And I think the next slide, stick it up, is this wasn't from that expedition, but this was in Greenland, I think. But this is what they look like from the side, these snow bridges. So we crossed dozens of these things trying to get off the Beardmore Glacier. So it was pretty sketchy. And then next slide, please. Back onto the Ross Ice Shelf, there aren't really any crevasses there, so it's pretty safe. And all we had to do to finish was walk diagonally across a bit of ice the size of France again. And we knew that Scott and his men had died somewhere close to the mountains. We knew that beyond that we were kind of in uncharted territory in a weird way, and maybe even beyond. I forget, Jonesy, what was your distance total? I should have.
Our total distance in kilometers was 2,285.
285. So I guess kind of
what's
2,888, I think.
Yeah.
Give or take. But
we're penis measuring now, aren't we? Basically.
Exactly. Yeah. But arguably, kind of once we'd crossed that threshold, and I'm trying to work out. I don't have a calculator here, but like whatever Scott did in kilometers. But once we were kind of beyond that, we were in human terms, we were kind of in uncharted territory. Like no one had walked this far before, and in these conditions. And I think I was secretly hoping that deep down this might be like the ultimate kind of silent retreat. Like Tarka and I might become two monks on the ultimate pilgrimage, and that we'd have 10, 11, 12 hours a day just to kind of meditate and reflect, and we'd somehow access some enlightened level of consciousness, and that did not happen. In fact, I maybe got a glimpse of like what the 85-year-old me will be like, because we just turned gradually into two really grumpy old bastards who were just fed up with this place and fed up with being hungry and fed up with chafing and cold and running nose and all that kind of stuff. And finally, trying next slide, go for it. 105 days. Now, I often confuse people because I either say 105 or 108. Sometimes I say 108 because we had to walk when we landed at McMurdo. We had to walk for 3 days in the wrong direction to get to the start line. So we did 108 days in total of walking, but 105 days from Scott's Hut to the pole and back again. Either way, it was a long old camping trip. And this was the finish line. Now, it's a pretty weird and unglamorous looking spot, and this is essentially it's what's called a working crack. So the ice, so the sledges are still on the Ross ice shelf. So you've got this sort of floating, enormously thick ice shelf that moves subtly up and down against the shore of the island, which is the kind of grey rock that we're stood on. So that was our finish line, like getting back to Ross Island, because Captain Scott's, or one of Captain Scott's huts, this Discovery Hut, is just over that ridge in the background. So this would have been the finish line for Captain Scott had he survived. This was the finish line for Shackleton when he turned around short of the pole on his Nimrod expedition. And this was the goal that I'd been aiming for most of my adult life. Like, this was the culmination of the biggest, most audacious dream I'd ever had. And I remember thinking, sort of daydreaming, long before we even started this trip, trying to imagine what the last hour of this journey would be like. And I'd always imagined Tarka and me, skiing along in tears, high-fiving, hugging, flying a flag. And that didn't really happen. And then finally, we saw the shore come into sight, and we saw these people sort of walking down. So the people in black and orange are Kiwis, almost all the Kiwis. So they're Antarctica, New Zealand, who have Scott Base, which is just around the corner. So they'd obviously been following us and came to sort of clap us over the line. So we kind of saw these people coming out, and I was seeing, where the rock was and where we were going to finish, and thinking, what, this isn't just the culmination of 108 days of really hard work. This has been, years and years of hard work and sacrifice and a lot of money. I mean, these aren't cheap camping trips, and this was my 11th big expedition. So each one before had been a stepping stone, bringing us closer to this goal. And I remember like taking off my skis and sort of getting up to the edge of the ice and stepping over the line with Tarka. So we sort of stepped ashore at the same time, and nothing happened. There was no immediate elation or joy, or there was just this kind of vague relief, I think, that we didn't have to go any further. And actually, one of the things I was most excited about was that we were on completely different time zones. Like, Tark and I have been traveling essentially on UK time just to make communication things easier, which meant that we were technically traveling at night. And there are some advantages, like we had more sun on the tent because we were sleeping during the local daytime. So the solar panels work. It's normally a little bit warmer at night when you're sleeping. But for us, when this photo was taken, I think it was quite late at night, and for everyone else, it was breakfast time. So one of the first things they told us was that the chef knew we were coming, and there was breakfast waiting for us. So that was the most exciting thing of that moment, that we were going to have a big fried breakfast. So it was this absolutely peculiar anticlimax, and then I came home to this weird feeling of not only kind of profound physical exhaustion, but also like real loss in a strange way. Like, and someone said to me a while ago, isn't it strange that managing failure is so much easier than managing success? And we'd had so many failures, kind of building up to this expedition, and so many failures even to start. We weren't fully funded, the team wasn't ready, we weren't fully fit, weren't insured, hadn't got the logistics figured out, whatever reason it was. But we'd had all these failures to start. And every time we had to postpone by a year, because you have this definite window each year, I just became more and more driven and more motivated. And yet when we succeeded, like this thing, this force, this dream that had been giving me all of this drive and focus and direction and energy for years and years and years, it evaporated. And there was nothing there to replace it, because this was a kind of goal that took pretty much everything I had, like all of my time, all of my energy, all my focus, all the money I could lay my hands on. It just swallowed it up. So there was no kind of bandwidth left really to think about what I was going to do afterwards. And I guess I thought, and this was maybe my mistake, I kind of thought that life was going to be awesome, because that's the story, isn't it? Like, you work your butt off, you aim really high, you achieve the goal, and you've made it, and you're a success. And actually, the reality was that I really struggled, like, for a few months after this trip to well, how do I top that? I've done the biggest thing I wanted to do in the field that I've been passionate about for years. Where the hell do I go from here? So I think I kind of made the mistake of thinking that success, and this was certainly my definition of success, in my 20s, and I'm probably younger than that. That I saw it as this very literal finish line in the future, that a threshold, that if I worked hard enough and achieved enough of something, or accumulated enough of something else, one day I'd get there, I'd step across that line, and everything would be great. Like, my life would change profoundly. And it didn't really work out that way. So this was an educational trip for me, and an educational process. And actually, looking back on this expedition, my happiest memories aren't finishing the trip. They're sort of at different points in between. So I think that's a kind of useful metaphor for how my own definition of success has shifted, because I don't think I'm any less ambitious. Maybe I'm getting like middle-aged and soft these days. Maybe I'm losing the fight. Who knows? But so I'm still ambitious. I've still got ridiculous goals and plans bubbling away. But I think I've learned to see goals as kind of waypoints rather than the finish line. And I think my own definition of success, actually how I'd sum it up, would be to, I guess, like, to strive well rather than to arrive. I think that's how I'd sum it up. So that is my story. Thank you, guys.
That is epic. I mean,
that's a TED Talk right there.
Seriously.
That's your fourth one.
Oh, strive well. I love that. Have you got that tattooed on your body now somewhere? I mean,
no, I don't have a tattoo, and I secretly quite like one. I'm just trying to think of the right, like, I don't want to be too cliched. I don't want like the map of Antarctica, but yeah. Any ideas welcome.
Well, actually, I've suffered from this issue as well. I mean, like, I'm like, do I want to kind of get a tattoo to commemorate my trips, that I've done on my body? And then I just think, like you make a documentary, you're not entirely happy with it. You do a journey and you think about certain aspects of it. Yeah, let's just let it be.
Don't do it would be my advice.
Lauren's got a lovely tattoo. We won't talk about that one.
Take it from somebody that knows. It was a bad life decision when I was 18 and in a sorority. I will say no more, except for now our daughter Morgan, if I'm in the shower, she'll say, "Mommy, why do you have that sticker on your bottom?" And I'm like, oh, and I try to avoid that question. And I was like, well, Mommy made some bad life decisions. So hopefully it'll make it uncool to get tattoos. That would be the only good thing that came out of that. But back to strive well.
Yeah, back to strive well. I mean, that's pretty amazing. I mean, like, to go from, like, being so focused on a particular goal, you leave probably a lot of relationships behind. You push away friends, family, because I hate to say it, they are detractors from it sometimes. You can't spend the time investing into them.
It's a pretty selfish pursuit in many, many ways. Yeah.
I've never heard managing failure is easier than managing success, but it rings so true. Although when you found that out when you achieved a record down in Antarctica, I found that out when I got the corner office in San Francisco. it was a very, I mean, mine is way less sexy than yours, but when you said that, I was like, oh, I don't know what you mean. But when you explained it, it's true. It's like this thing that you had always set your life up for. When you achieve it, it feels a bit like a letdown, and you're like, is this really success? And it led me to have to redefine what success meant to me. And it sounds like it did a bit to you.
And I think when you fail at something, the goal is still there. When you succeed, the goal is gone. So I think that's the biggest.
And
thing.
when you succeed and it doesn't feel the way that you had hoped it would or thought it would, or et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Do you actually? I feel like we can relate to that to a degree, actually, Lauren. I mean, how do you feel about our conclusion in the Outback? So, Ben, we did a long walk in the Outback with Morgan when she was 15 to 19 months old, and when we
talk about a tent mate, when you were talking about solo and how you achieve enlightenment, and then when you do it with somebody else, it's a tent mate, and you have to have all these rules in the tent. And I was thinking to myself, when you expedition with a 1.5-year-old, you're on their schedule and there are no rules. It gets crazy.
Oh man,
shift over
I
a little bit, Lauren,
can't imagine.
Can you see? Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
1.5-year-olds do not make easygoing tent mates, let me tell you. But yes, the 108 days resonated. We did 102.
So you beat me again, Ben. Thanks.
This was my first expedition though, and so we did 102. Granted, we were quite slow. However, when we got done, it was like kind of the same thing. Like, we jumped into the water, which felt really good, but we had a beer and a burger, which felt really good. However, it was there was no arena. Like Justin talks about when he kayaked into New Zealand, there was thousands of people on the shore.
I think I had two pretty amazing ends to those two trips there. I mean, one with 25,000 other people. You know, I mean, that's kind of crazy to have that hoo-ha. But then the end with Alex Scammy. I mean, that's a pretty amazing act of sportsmanship kindness. That was awesome. That was
amazing.
Really, really magical. Yeah.
He's my main man crush. So sorry, Paula Ben.
That's totally legitimate. I can't really compete.
That's
definitely not with his hair.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know what? Different strokes for different folks. It's all good. Bald, slideshow. He looks like Slideshow Bob, actually, Alex Scammy. Let's be real. He really does. But
and then the Outback. So how was your third one?
And the Outback was interesting. We march into town, dragging
homeless.
This like rickshaw-looking thing, looking
People
homeless
asked
and
us
dirty.
if we were on the dole, which is like welfare.
Yeah.
Which, that makes you feel good when you're on this big adventure and someone's like, hey, are you homeless and on the dole? And you're like, no, I'm doing this because I chose to.
and we get in and like there was a sense of like, you know what, you got to search for something else. You've got to search to make this the rest of your life, rather than, it's always about the accomplishment or what the end is, what the end point. It's about the journey. And so when we got back from that, we actually as a family sat down and we were like, we need to sort out our priorities. We need to sort out why we're actually living, what our family code and motto is. And so we actually did an exercise where we try to work that out. And we came up with a bit of a mission statement. And we called it a mission possible statement. That's to live kind, live curious, and live great. And so we make decisions based on that wouldn't necessarily be the best financial decisions. Like, we'll go off and take camels across the Simpson Desert rather than, me book a bunch of work that I probably should be doing. And do you regret it sometimes? But yeah. Especially during COVID.
But it was for me, it was the end point, that crossing the finish line. I mean, it was imaginary finish line. It was just something that we had deemed doing. And if you really looked at our expedition, we said we were going to walk halfway across Australia through the Outback. We did do that, but ultimately we failed because on day 8, we lost an axle and had to hitchhike back to civilization, and we wound up in a 5-star resort. So I think when you're in a 5-star resort on day 9 of your expedition, I wouldn't call that success. However, I did call it success because I had a shower and a wine and I was in a 5-star resort, and I'm like, thank God I made a bad life choice and here I am. But anyways, we had to refresh our what is success for this expedition, and success was to keep on going. Success was that we carved out 3 months to have this family experience, and that we didn't know if we could merge family life and adventure, and this was our way to figure out how to do that. when we became parents, I know for me, my whole corporate life was the thing I put all of my focus on. And when kids came, I could not see, rightly or wrongly, how those two things came together. And I won't talk for Justin, but I know he was struggling with that for adventure and how, this is my passion. I put everything in it. How do kids come together? So for us, the expedition was to get over that mental barrier. So it wasn't about the kilometers. It was about, can we prove it to ourselves that we can actually do this? Is that...
No, 100%. I definitely agree. I mean, like, I do have one slight different recollection that's coming to me about the end of the trip, and that's actually
when you were crying.
Well, I was crying, but Lauren actually wanted to keep on going.
I was kind of joking.
I was done. Not. I was like, I'm over it, and Lauren was like, "Do you want to keep going to Melbourne?" I was like, "No, I need to finish. I need to stop because I need to take care of myself."
But that goes to success. So I mean, or actually, that goes to why. Which, Ben, you had talked about your why. I want to ask you the why question, because I do think it's really interesting to truly understand why on earth people do these very extreme things. Because before I met Justin, I was like, why would you want to run 100 kilometers in the bush with a broken foot, or just in general, when life is hard enough anyways? Why do this thing? But for you, I heard world record, enlightenment potentially, because you were looking for world records, maybe not, but I put that assumption. Enlightenment, you had mentioned, was a why of a solo mission, or a hope, or maybe a goal of the joint mission. Self-sufficiency, where, can I do this on my own, and what am I truly capable of alone? Exploration of individual capability. What else? What is your why? Those were things I was hearing, but
it's a really challenging question, and an old friend of mine, a guy called Tony Hale. He was a sort of a expedition companion back in the kind of, for me, like the early years. We did a couple of trips to Greenland together, and he managed he basically looked after me when I was going solo to the North Pole in 2004. But he'd sailed around the world a couple of years before that, and he said that the answer he gave to the question, like, why would you sail around the world, he came up with long after he decided to do it. So he kind of came up with the answer just to try and think of the sort of shortest possible phrase that would keep people happy and kind of ask the question. But I think for me, I think there was a lot of, like, early on starting out. I was 23 on my first big expedition in 2001, and I think there was a lot of ego involved. Like, there's a lot of wanting to prove something, to kind of make a statement, to kind of test myself, but to kind of prove that to other people. And I think, kind of going back earlier than that, and this is the story I don't really tell when I'm in, like, keynote mode on stage. But I basically grew up without knowing my dad. So my parents split up when I was very young, like 5, I guess. My brother was 3. And my biological father was an orphan, so he had no family. Grew up in a home, never knew his parents, no family. So, like, the trail kind of stopped with him, and he completely vanished a few years later. Like, I was 10 or 11 when I last had a letter from him, and I finally tracked him down again in 2013. So just before we went to Antarctica for the Scott expedition, after about 25, 26 years of having zero contact with him. And I think, looking back, like, as a young boy, part of me was looking for, like, male role models, and was looking for, like, a template for what it meant to sort of this weird transition into being a man. And it's pretty obvious now in hindsight that all of my heroes came from the pages of National Geographic and books about Scott and Shackleton and Amundsen and Reinhold Messner and Robin Knox Johnson and Chris Bonington, all these kind of large than life characters who I now almost look on as almost as like overblown caricatures of kind of macho achievement, and a lot of them, a lot of living ones I'm lucky enough to know now, and some of them are still, like, bashing away in their 70s, like, still yearning for something. So in a way, that was what I aspired to do. I looked up to men like them and wanted to do the sort of things they'd done, and I think probably also wanted people to look at me the same way and say the same things about me. So I think a lot of like my early career was built, probably on lack of self-esteem as a kid. Like I was not all-star athlete. I wasn't. I didn't struggle at school. I wasn't desperately dyslexic, but I was definitely not motivated. I didn't respond well to being sat in a chair in a room and being told to remember things. That's just not how my brain works. And I was lucky enough to grow up in the southwest of the UK, so Devon, Somerset, which are kind of quite rural, quite outdoorsy areas. So my brother and I were like best mates as kids, and we were always outside. And I was in the Scouts and you go camping and climbing and stuff. And to me, like being outside was where I kind of came alive, and just and the wilder and more challenging, better, really. So that's kind of how it started. And it's interesting. I did an interview a few years ago, I think it was 2015, 16, can't remember, for Radio 4 in the UK, so like BBC Radio. And it's this iconic thing. It's called Desert Island Discs. I don't know if you guys have heard about it. But
I've heard that interview actually, I think.
Gosh, it's been going for forever. And that is like zenith. Forget TED, like that was it. I'd made it, Desert Island Discs. But what I didn't really realize, they obviously do a lot of homework on the guests, and you have a meeting with a producer like 3 months out, and she ends up, presumably producing some huge dossier on you that then the presenter was Kirsty Young. So Kirsty gets this big dossier. And the other thing I didn't realize was that they record an hour and a half, and then they edit it down to half an hour, 40 minutes. So Kirsty was one of the most amazing interviewers I've ever met, because she'd really read up on me and she'd kind of done her homework. But I had done zero homework on her other than listening to interviews. But she's not very forthcoming. It's all about the guests. And what I hadn't realized was that her dad basically walked out of their family home when she was 7 and never came back again. So she kind of credited her career with, and in the media and becoming pretty high profile in the UK, with almost wanting to like create a pedestal for herself to say, well, Dad, this is where I am and I'm doing okay. And if you're still out there, you can find me. And I think a lot of her story was she kind of transposed onto mine. And it was a fascinating interview, because I knew of a few people in my world that had come from similar backgrounds, like Ed Stafford, who walked the length of the Amazon. He's an old friend. We were actually in the army together a million years ago. And Ed is an orphan. Bear Grylls, his dad died when he was really young. Ranulph Fiennes, his dad died when he was very young. So I knew of a lot of people from this like adventure world, a lot of men who'd had similar stories. And someone emailed the producer of Desert Island Discs a few weeks after the show aired, and the producer forwarded to me, basically saying, did I know how many American presidents had little or no contact with their fathers? And it was like 11 or 12 US presidents, so nearly half of all American presidents. So So I guess in a way there was this kind of slightly traumatic childhood, and not unusual in some ways to have families disintegrating. I think that's the rule rather than the exception these days. But certainly, like, not knowing my dad, like there was this big gap. My mum remarried, but I didn't get on with my stepdad very well. That didn't last very long. So I was like always looking for role models and heroes. So there was a lot of ego early on, and definitely a lot of like comparison and envy of other people and wanting to do the same things and achieve the same things. And I feel like at some point I sort of transcended that. And it kind of, in a way, it's there's something quite cool about doing the sort of things that we've done, because it just sort of short circuits that, so many people think in terms of like job titles and careers and hierarchy, and we've done stuff that's just completely out there. So in a way, you don't have to play that game anymore. And I feel like part of me has sort of transcended that at some point relatively recently. I'm 43 now. I remember like my teens thinking, when I'm like 25, I'm gonna have 2 kids and a nice house and now I turned 43 2 weeks ago, and now I'm like, shit, I'm still figuring this stuff out. Like it's when am I going to be a grown up, like officially? When does this happen? But but yeah, so part of me is definitely, and Tarka was such a good influence on me in so many respects, because he's a really weird character, and I hope I don't even know if he will watch or listen to things like this, but he's basically the same age as me, a few months younger, but and he works in tech. He's a programmer, he's a coder, lives in Chamonix in the French Alps, and he basically divides his time between being out in the mountains with his dog every day and coding on his computer. And he's very private, and he's not on social media. Hates doing interviews, hates doing public speaking, and has like the strongest sort of internal compass of any human being I've ever met, and the least regard for like external public acclaim or validation of anyone I've ever met. And I remember having this conversation with Tim at some point. He was like, well, when we get back to Heathrow Airport in London, like, he's like, if there are any press there, you can talk to them, and I'll just go and I'll make sure we've got all the bags and stuff. He just had no interest in celebrity, I guess, which I think 10, 15 years ago was something that I aspired to. I guess I kind of assumed then that there was some correlation between accomplishment and public profile, and I now realize they're completely disconnected. And actually, I quite like that I don't get recognized in the street. We stop for autographs, and I wouldn't want to. I've had opportunities to go into TV presenting, whatever, but I kind of realized a while ago I didn't do this to become an entertainer. Like that was never the dream. So I'm still trying to figure out really. But Tarka was a great influence because we didn't like. I remember thinking like that Scott expedition. It was a very British story. Like Scott Shackleton, Scott had died, Shackleton was defeated. We'd finished it. I kind of remember thinking we were going to come home for like medals and this huge. I mean, there was some press at Heathrow, but it didn't get a massive amount of recognition. Partly because a lot of British people do this kind of thing for whatever weird reason. So there's this kind of misconception that it's all been done before. And like Prince Harry flew in and did Last Degree like the year before us. And there's a kids TV show called Blue Peter, and there'd been a Blue Peter presenter flew in and did a Last Degree on a fat bike. So there was just this kind of misconception that everyone had, just every man and his dog had trekked to the South Pole. So I went almost unnoticed. And Tarka was just the best influence because he was like, look, we've done something so weird that to try and expect the layperson to understand or appreciate what was different about this versus the children's TV presenter at the South Pole looking the same as us with their goggles on and their hood up. He says just ludicrous. So he's like, I'm pretty content with what we achieved. Like, well, how come you're not? So he was a great influence.
I mean, that purity is so beautiful. I mean, that's as I'm getting older, and it's funny because it's very similar parallels. I was full of ego, young. I wanted to matter. And I don't think it was like I wanted to beat my chest because I wanted to, I wanted to necessarily become famous. I think that was a slight perk I was enjoying at certain points with notoriety after the Tasman crossing. It was more that I wanted to matter in people's eyes. I wanted to be someone. I mean, like when I was a little kid, and how conceited is this? When I was 4 years old, my mum asked me, what do you want to be when you grow up? Most people say, pilot, this, that, the other, firefighter, whatever. I said that, and I pointed out the car window to this 50-foot tall statue. And she was like, you want to be a statue? And it's like, yes. And I was like, and she's like, why do you want to be a statue? And I said, well, because then everyone will look at me. And so that's either a kid who's hyper conceited or just really wants some sort of recognition. And so it's been funny as I've gotten older. That's kind of
flash forward to high school. How'd that go for you?
High school was terrible for me. I was fat, really awkward. Went through puberty basically in my second last year of school.
I saw a picture of Justin when he was 21, and I was like, "So what are you like, 13, 14?" He's like, "No."
No, I'm 21 in that photo, Lauren. So I'm glad we met when we did, Lauren. Anyway, good old Asian genetics, but the purity. I get jealous of people like Tarka, where they can leave the ego at the door. They can make the best decisions because they're not. Well, when I'm on an expedition, I make good decisions because it's you're not playing in the sphere of media. You're playing in the sphere of life and death, and your decisions do matter. But it'd be so amazing to be so zen. You could go on a trip, a massive journey that you could pay for by yourself, so because no one needs to know, and then just come back and just be contented not to tell anyone.
Yeah.
And I think that's like Buddha level explorer, and I want to get there one day. And unfortunately, because of
that would be the dream.
Because of what we do though, there's sponsorships, there's media, and then you're caught in that trap of self promotion. And I think the hard thing, the line is to navigate the smoke you're blowing up other people's asses about yourself in order to sell yourself, and not breathing in too much of that smoke yourself.
But you do talk about your evolution of adventure,
definitely.
about how it started with ego and then it moved to proving yourself, or like proving. When you did Antarctica, it was like, yes, I didn't just fluke it the first time.
So, I mean, it was to say that, but also to be completely honest, and you might turn over, not in your grave because you're still alive, but Antarctica could have been anywhere for me. Like, I just wanted to go on a big trip, and I wanted to suffer. But there was something really strange with that trip that it could have been anywhere. It could have been North Pole, South Pole. It could have been in a desert. I just wanted it. I was yearning for a big, big journey.
Why did you want to suffer?
I think I worked out that I was actually relatively good at it. And it was something, for once, on an expedition, I'm a very average bloke. I'm really, really average, and I don't know how we got married. I mean, like, honestly, how I convinced you. But like, I'm a really average bloke, and like, I'm not smart. I'm not fit. I'm definitely not fit. But like, I will grind. I will grind better than most people. And that's one of my core competencies. And so I wanted to go on a journey where I could, test that muscle and showcase that muscle again. And also there was the side thing of like, I did want to make another documentary as well. And I can't get inspired by other people's projects. They've got to be my own. So yeah, it's an interesting one, but I had a thought I wanted to talk about. Sorry.
I was going to say just the grind, because that goes to, Ben, something you've been working on, which is the Grit Academy. And speaking
of self-promotion and
no, but it was something.
Great segue, Lauren.
No, but it was something I was just looking as I was Google stalking you before this interview. I really struggle being a mom and in parenthood, because there are days when I wake up and think, when can I go to bed again? Like, literally, I just woke up and I'm like, and it feels like survival. But then you have these guilt attacks where you're like, I'm so blessed and I should be enjoying every moment and I should be leaning in and doing it all. And if I'm not doing the career and doing the motherhood thing, and it just all feels too much and it's exhausting, and I oftentimes feel like a failure. So I went through the Outback because I wanted more resilience. I had kind of achieved everything I had set out to achieve, but I'd always stayed in a societal box that was very defined. So that helped me get a little bit more resilience. However, right now in COVID, with a 4-year-old and a 9-month-old in an apartment with Justin and I pivoting a business and both working from home, I would love a little bit more grit. And I was wondering, how do you learn grit? Because apparently it's a learnable thing. Do I have to go to Antarctica or can I?
No, I don't think so. And I think actually Antarctica is, I mean, you can really suffer down there. Of course, it's a good place for a bit of bit of self-imposed privation and starvation and chafing and all that stuff. But actually, life is super simple in Antarctica. Like, there are no distractions. You don't look at your diary and think, oh, what calls have I got? What have I arranged? What meetings? Because there's nothing going on. You don't check your inbox and think, okay, which emails do I need to? Oh, look at my to-do list. It's your to-do list is like eat, walk, sleep, like repeat. Like, life is super simple, and there are just two of you, and there's nothing going on. So actually, like, staying focused on a goal on expeditions is super easy, I think, compared to trying to stay focused on some slightly more ephemeral goal. Like, I've been perpetually trying to write a book for years, and I'm still sort of slowly chipping away at it. But right now, I can easily fill my entire week with distractions, and there's a never-ending list of things to do. And we don't even have kids yet, but we've got stuff going on in the house and projects and things and and emails and all this busyness. So easier than ever. And the internet, social media, like life is kind of full of potential distractions. And actually most of those go away in Antarctica. But yeah, the Grit Academy, the idea, I blame the idea on a friend of mine, because we were talking about kind of our mutual world, like the fact that I was a big part of how I was making a living up until February this year was flying around the world and speaking at big corporate events. And suddenly that has vanished overnight. So I'm like, oh, okay, well, there needs to be a pivot here of some sort. And I did a couple of talks on Zoom, back in March, and like the first time really I'd done that kind of thing. And I went into it thinking this is going to be a really, really shitty version of like being at an event on stage. And in many ways, it is. It's really hard to get into the same
because
space.
You don't have the vibe of the audience.
You don't. No, and even after you've given hundreds of talks, there's still that kind of emotion and nerves and like getting back on stage and excitement, and you see the audience and the reaction. And Zoom, I'm just like sat in the chair I'm sitting in now, and nothing really changes. But what was wonderful, what I realized really early on, was that doing events on Zoom, the best bit is the Q&A. Because people can just type a question into a chat box. They don't even have to use their real name. And it completely removes that apprehension that people might have about putting a hand up in front of a big live audience, hundreds of people, their bosses, their peers, their friends, their colleagues, and asking a question that might sound stupid, but it means something to them. And Zoom completely removes that. So you have this incredible, certainly I found, like incredible connection. Like it definitely doesn't work for like a keynote, but it works brilliantly for the kind of fireside chat conversation Q&A. Like you have this incredible intimacy in a strange way. So we were kind of riffing on that. A few friends that had, like me, had seen their speaking work vanish. And one of them was like, well, Ben, you need to like package up what you talk about and just sell it a different way, like put it online. He said, like, when I think of you, I think of tenacity and perseverance and determination and grit. He said, you're the king of grit. You should call it the Grit Academy. And I was like, ooh, quite like that. So initially I was like, great, this is going to be like money for old rope. I'll just do my normal talk and I'll just do it on Zoom, and fantastic, sell some tickets. And then when I started thinking about it, it actually became this quite challenging, like philosophical exercise. Like, what is, and there are entire books on grit and, psychologists, all sorts of academic papers and things. And the whole thing in a nutshell is that my experience has been that the part of me that has been tested and stretched more than any other on these big expeditions has been my own self-belief. And I don't mean my own ego or conceit or arrogance or any of that kind of stuff, like self-importance. I mean like the belief in my own capacity to do stuff, like my own sense of agency, and also kind of the belief that tomorrow can be better than today, and that I have the capacity somehow to make that happen. So to me, that's a sort of healthy view of self-belief, and I think it's been like the biggest ingredient in the success that I've had in this weird niche that I've pursued. And my theory is that self-belief is a bit like a muscle, like grit, perseverance, resilience, tenacity. They're all kind of the same thing, really. And I think they're all a sort of lagging measure of your self-belief. Like if you don't believe in yourself, you're not going to persevere for very long. So my theory is that self-belief is a malleable, elastic human quality that is similar in many ways to physical fitness, strength or endurance. Like the more you stretch it and test it, the stronger it becomes. And the reverse is true. If you don't give it the stimulus that it needs to grow, then it'll atrophy and wither and become weaker. So, and strangely, I didn't talk about this trip, but I went back to Antarctica in late 2017, November 2017, and did what eventually became a solo trip to the South Pole. But the original plan was to go a bit further than that. And I realized very early on in that expedition that actually I'd kind of done everything I wanted to in Antarctica, and that where am I going with this tangent? I'm trying to think how to explain this. Like in a strange way, this was now the least adventurous thing I could be doing. Like being back in Antarctica in my sledge harness on my, wherever it was, 12th, 13th big expedition, was me completely in my comfort zone. I knew exactly what I was doing. It didn't test me in the way that it used to years before. Even getting it off the ground was relatively simple. Like, I knew how to raise money. It came together way more easily than any expedition I've ever done in the past. And as a result, it didn't challenge me. When I said I didn't learn much, obviously I did, because I realized that I kind of had to take my own medicine really and think, well, okay, this isn't really an adventure anymore. And that probably sounds completely conceited, but it wasn't, I wasn't scared. I knew what I was doing. It was a relatively easy trip, but also I didn't have that kamikaze motivation to like keep pushing myself. Like I just went at a steady pace, and there were bits of it that I loved, and particularly that I started from a place called Birkenau Island, and I was following the route that a friend of mine called Henry Worsley had attempted, and obviously you guys probably know the story, but he died. He was actually airlifted out to back to Chile and Punta Arenas and died in hospital there. But he fell ill towards the end of his own expedition, and so
guy.
Yeah. So I mean, immediately after that, hearing that, I wanted nothing more to do with polar expeditions. I was just like, yeah, shit, this is really selfish. And oh man, look at he's left behind a widow and 2 kids, and oh, well, geez. And I know his family quite well, and his son Max said to me, look, that we've actually been contacted by a lot of people because it had so much, publicity in the UK, that story. ALE had like a record number of inquiries the year after for people wanting to do solo trips. So suddenly there was this list of people saying they wanted to do it. And Max Worsley said to me, look, if we were wondering if you were thinking about it, and if you did, would you consider supporting the same charity that Henry was raising money for? Yeah. So I kind of went down there to do that, but I realized very early on that rather than kind of inspiring me to push myself even harder, like Henry's story was like, get home safely. Like, that's the most important thing. Anything else is a bonus, but like get home again. And I was engaged. I hadn't got married yet, but I was engaged at the time. So I suddenly had this like new level of responsibility and in my life. So I didn't have that kind of kamikaze desire anymore. And also it wasn't really an adventure in a lot of ways. So I'm going for a wild tangent here, but my theory is that self-belief is like a muscle. The more you stretch it and test it, the stronger it gets, and that it is the most important ingredient in being tenacious and gritty and determined. So I kind of created the Grit Academy as a way to try and tell this story and explain this through the medium of Zoom, and it's actually become, I've loved it because it's a totally new thing, and it's meant this steep learning curve, and it's definitely not a keynote. It's 90 minutes. A lot of that is actually Q&A and discussion, and it's a completely different format. So it's evolving. I've been on 2 so far. So the third one is Thursday this week, and it's been quite small groups so far because I've realized I hate selling myself. I hate self-promotion. That's why it's wonderful having a speaker agent, because you don't have to do that. And suddenly I'm like hawking my own stuff. But it's been really, really, quite challenging and quite rewarding. But it's also made me like think a lot about again, rewinding back to the topic today, like success, because I think we're all kind of whatever the word is, goal-oriented beings, like human beings. I think healthy human beings need a goal, something to pursue, and rather than being a sort of simple exercise and like, well, here are 5 steps for you to be more determined, actually it's become quite a challenging sort of thought exercise, because of course, it's one thing to be determined, but if you're pursuing the wrong thing entirely, then there's no bigger waste of time or energy. So it's been a really interesting exercise, and I'm loving it, but it's sort of evolving with each iteration.
I usually save this question for the end, but I think we always try to give people kind of a step that they can take this week that would help them get more resilience or more joy or more gratitude. Just for grit, is there something that I can try to do this week from home, or have you found something that is a really good way to test that muscle?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think my theory is the whole thing comes back to self-belief, and And I think the stimulus that self-belief responds to is not success or failure, because they're kind of pretty arbitrary terms, but it's endeavor, it's adventure, it's like trying something new. And adventure in the broadest, most genuine sense of the word. I don't mean go bungee jumping for the first time or whatever, but doing something you haven't done before, and something you don't know how to do, and something that you're kind of starting before you're ready. Like that's I forget where I borrowed that term from, but I read it a few days ago and loved it. Trying something. I think a lot of people mistakenly think they shouldn't attempt something until they're confident, but confidence only ever follows courage. Like, you can't learn to swim by reading a book about swimming. Like, you have to get wet at some point, and you're not going to be good at it the first time you try. So I think the first, like the vital first step in developing self-belief and therefore grit is attempting something new, attempting something that is scary and that you're not confident about. Trying something different, getting, and it's difficult to sort of talk about this without descending into cliche, but getting outside your comfort zone, trying something new. So I think that's the first step.
I love it.
And I often sort of remind myself, I remember standing with Taka in Captain Scott's hut in October 2013 and having like the ultimate bout of imposter syndrome. This was here I was, I'd ended up here because I'd been talking about, the fact that I reckon I could finish the journey that had defeated the two biggest icons, the two big brand names in my field, certainly as an Englishman. Scott and Shackleton are both still household names in the UK, and here I was saying I could go one step further than they could, and suddenly standing in that hut on those wooden floorboards, I just remember thinking, shit, like what the hell? I just felt, and I wasn't a rank amateur, but I still felt completely out of my depth. And just cursing myself for having got in that position, and I felt like a total fraud. Like, any minute now I was going to be found out. And like, fast forward to a couple of years later, I was working on a business deal, I guess, and I'd somehow ended up sat at a boardroom table in London with investors and lawyers and tax advisors, and one of the lawyers used a term that I'd never heard before. I had no idea what he was talking about, and I suddenly had this like sinking feeling, like, okay, I've ended up at this table because I'm good at dragging a sledge, but I'm totally, I'm not qualified to be here. Like, any second now, I'm going to be found out. And I had to like remind myself that feeling had come with every big expedition I've ever done, apart maybe from the last one, right, where I knew what I was doing, and that moreover, like, that feeling wasn't a sign that I was in the wrong place. It was the opposite. It was a sign that I was absolutely in the right place, and that whatever happened, I was gonna learn from it. So
I love that.
Was it 50 Cent who said either win or learn?
I don't know.
I don't think he said it as poetically. I think there was a bit more cursing.
I think you have to wrap it when you say it. If it was 50 Cent.
He also said live hard, die trying, or die trying as well, I think.
There is actually, here's a little tangent. There is, I don't know if it's just an audiobook, but he, so 50 Cent is his real name's Curtis Jackson, I think.
Curtis Jackson,
yeah. And he I don't know if there is actually a book, but there's certainly, I was listening to his audiobook, which it's called Hustle Harder. I couldn't write a book like that. It's just, I'm English, but he's a sharp businessman. It's really interesting. Like, there's a whole chapter on like equity and business structures and investing. I'm like, whoa, hang on a minute. It surprised me.
You've thrown me down a tangent now, actually, because I remember listening to your Desert Island Discs episode, and I remember you having some pretty interesting music choices, and if I remember correctly, and I think the host, sorry, I forget her name, but I just wonder how many times she's probably played some of the tracks that you selected on her show. So
I think I got some first. I got like 90s hip hop. I got that one, and Radio 4 is pretty conservative.
Yeah,
and pretty, So I had hip hop, and they had to make sure there weren't any swear words, obviously. So I got Pete Rock and CL Smooth.
That's right.
They Reminisce Over You. That was my hip hop track, and I got some pretty obscure like electronic music on there as well. Like I as a teenager, like we were living in Kent, so like southeast of the UK, and there was a part of Kent on the coast called Medway where there were a lot of big warehouses, and that was like in the 90s, like the start of the UK's like big illegal rave culture. So I genuinely never actually got into the drug side of that because I was getting into cycling and running and stuff, so I was pretty fit. But I loved as a teenager going to these big raves in warehouses with like loud, kind of drum and bass jungle music. I just loved it. So so I have this sort of weird penchant for electronic music, and I got some pretty obscure tracks on that.
No, I said well played to you, because like you can almost hear it in her voice as she's introducing the tracks, or when you did, and I thought that was fantastic. I thought it was really, really good.
Can I ask a cliche adventure question?
You ask a cliche adventure question.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask an obscure one.
Okay, and I know because you don't love. Well, you get asked this question all the time, so I usually like to ask different questions, but I am curious on Ben, something you said, which is, try something new. The adventure is going out of your comfort zone, and that really, by the time you've done multiple polar expeditions for you, that wasn't your adventure. So what's next for you? What's Ben's next adventure? What makes you nervous? What are you excited to try that you haven't tried before?
Good question. Well, there is another Antarctic related plan, but it doesn't even involve a sledge harness. It doesn't involve trying to break any records whatsoever. And it kind of goes back to a sort of daydream I had when we were going up the Beardmore Glacier, Tark and I, in like late 2013. And it was a really cool part of the journey. It was really frightening. Crevasses everywhere, like this really weird alien terrain. But it was stunning. We had pretty good weather, and every day we'd see these vast valleys like stretching off east and west off our route, and we were almost certain that no one had ever walked down these valleys, and they were just beautiful. And I remember thinking, I'd love to come back here like one day, but just do it sensibly, like fly in, create a little base camp with like big camp beds and heaters and a chef and all that kind of stuff, and bring a few guides and just do some interesting like day trips into the mountains and down these valleys that no one's ever walked down. And wouldn't it be cool to bring like an amazing photographer, an amazing artist, an amazing writer, and kind of try and tell the story through different means? And then the story kind of evolved, and I started thinking, well, wouldn't it be cool to bring like a group of young people with like a young artist and a young photographer and a young poet, young music, whatever it is, whatever creative thing that they're into, and how about sort of matching them with amazing grizzled veteran mentors and kind of bringing this huge ragtag team down there. So loosely that's what I'm working on. We're definitely not going to the Beardmore Glacier because it's just really hard to get to, but it's probably going to be January 2022 because it's looking like this year's Antarctic season isn't even going to happen because of COVID, and because they have to bring the aircraft down from Canada. Can you guys hear me? I think my headphones might have died.
Can still hear you. Can you hear us?
Hear me? Hang on. What I might do, stand by. I'm just going to try and see if I can switch my audio to something else, because you're only coming in one ear now, and I think these like old.
I have to pee. Can I run and pee?
All right, go.
That I know it's not very, but I've after a kid, I can't hold it.
I'm keeping that in.
Okay, great.
I'm keeping that in. Oh, well, Lauren, I might drop her out for a second, actually. Have you got one?
You still hear me?
I can hear you. Yep.
Sweet. Okay, I've done it. Success. Right, I've unplugged the headphones.
Okay.
So that's the vague plan. So yeah, it's probably going to be January 2022, that season. But taking this group, so it's really the thing that interests me now is storytelling, and I totally plagiarized this line from a TV producer last year I was talking to you, but she said humans are narrative beings. We're not inspired by data. We're inspired by stories. And it just made me think, like, at the moment there are, there's a lot of data coming out of Antarctic climate science, but no one's really doing anything that differently. It's not really. It's just so hard to to sort of assimilate that it just becomes completely abstract for most people. And the numbers when you start looking at Antarctica are completely mind-blowing. Like it's, if you look at the amount of ice that's down there, it's measured in gigatons. I was like, what the hell's a gigaton? So I was like, well, okay, how many human beings are alive right now? And I can't remember the numbers, but what I can remember is that Antarctica right now has 3 million tons of ice for every single human being on Earth. So every single person on Earth right now has 3 million tons of ice in Antarctica. So it's completely mind-blowing. But it's data, which is just completely, it's impossible to sort of comprehend. And the stories coming out of Antarctica are the sort of stories that we have told. They're these kind of gung-ho, sort of, there's a wonderful book, if you haven't read it, called Terra Incognita by a lady called Sarah Wheeler, who did, she's British, but she somehow managed to join the American National Science Foundation had a sort of writers and artists program, and I think it's been disbanded, defunded now. But she basically she overwintered in Antarctica with the US program, and wrote this beautiful book about Antarctica. But she says at some point in it, and I read this years ago, she said she feared that Antarctica was turning into a testosterone zone where bearded hard men went to see how dead they could get. And about a year after I read that, I found out I was going to meet Sarah Wheeler at the Royal Geographical Society in London. I was like, oh shit, I don't think I had a beard back then, but I maybe like a little bit of stubble. But I was like, she is going to hate me. And actually, we got on brilliant. She's wonderful, but it's a really, really cool book. But yeah, but they're the kind of stories that are coming out of Antarctica. And I think the story that isn't being told about Antarctica that I want to tell is that, to me, it's got this pretty utopian element to it that is totally unique on planet Earth. Like, nobody owns its continent. It's vast. It's pretty much 2 Australias if you include the ice shelves, but nobody owns it. And it's governed by this international treaty that actually works pretty well. It's the largest nature reserve on the planet by several orders of magnitude. And when you arrive in Antarctica, no one checks your passport because it doesn't matter. Like, it is the flag that was flying over the bit of planet Earth you were born on is just totally irrelevant. And the only thing that matters is your ability to get on with your fellow human beings in a place where you have to get on, because it's invariably it's pretty challenging. So to me, there's a really important story about Antarctica, about human collaboration, I guess, and yes, it's there are sort of angles around sustainability and conservation and the environment, but ultimately it's just about human beings getting on better, like getting on together. So yeah, so telling stories is the next challenge, and not stories about me, but stories through the eyes of these young people that I'm going to be taking to Antarctica. So that's the next big adventure.
I love it.
And you've been doing a bit of that. I mean, like in terms of involved in. Sorry, what was the magazine? The publication.
Yeah, that was interesting. Avaunt, AVAUNT. Yeah, that was. I talk about that in the Grit Academy because I also try to sort of disabuse people of the kind of never give up, because Avaunt, like, we had to figure out when to stop. It went bust ultimately, and I lost a lot of money, and I kind of square it in my own mind by thinking, well, I probably lost about the same as I could have spent on doing a really swanky MBA somewhere, like going to Columbia. Not that I'm academically qualified to even think about that, but doing a good MBA somewhere in America, like, would be a 6-figure. That's what I lost on this business when it went under, and it was a fascinating adventure in every sense of the word, and I guess kind of sprang from the fact that it was stories and photographs of explorers, adventurers that had inspired me as a kid. So it kind of felt like, okay, here's a chance to almost to sort of reciprocate and kind of tell stories of people that are inspiring me now. And we didn't want it to be just like bearded dudes on mountains. We wanted it to be you can be an adventurer and be an architect or a doctor or an engineer or whatever. So an artist. So we just wanted to kind of profiled people that were not necessarily celebrities, but that were genuine pioneers and were kind of at the forefront of their respective fields. And it was a ton of fun. We had a brilliant team. It won a load of awards. It was physically a beautiful thing. And we really pride ourselves on making this outstanding magazine. But it didn't really occur to me when we launched this thing, and it basically started happening around the same time as the Scott expedition. So I was pretty distracted anyway, and then came back home. Just all I could think about was eating donuts, basically. So my mind wasn't on the job. So this thing kind of happened. Then I had two other co-founders, and suddenly it was out, and it was so rewarding, like making a physical thing and selling it. I hadn't done that before, and seeing it like on the shelves in newsagents. So that I got a real kick out of that. But it didn't occur to me to even think that I didn't really buy magazines anymore, and nobody really does these days. And we weren't in the business of selling magazines. None of them are. They're in the business of selling advertising. Like that. That's how it works. And we realized that we couldn't survive if we sold advertising to outdoor brands because they don't have any money. So we had to sell advertising to essentially to fashion brands and luxury brands and Ralph Lauren and Dunhill and Prada and all those watches, Rolex, all that kind of stuff. And most of these big brands assume that new magazines will go bust because most of them do. It's a really, really tough business model. So they wait for months, before they pay invoices. And as a magazine, you can invoice your advertisers when the magazine is on the shelf. So you have this huge lag between paying, everything, commissioning writers and photographers and sending them to Alaska or Tajikistan or wherever it is, and then printing this beautiful thing on beautiful paper and spending a fortune on that, and then finally invoicing the advertisers. So the business model was screwed like from the outset, and people were like, well, you've got to go digital. That's where the money is. But I knew, like, the Scott expedition still has a YouTube channel. And YouTube were like a media partner in like 2013, 2014. So they were really pushing this thing. And we had ads on the videos. And it made like nothing, like a few $100s, I think, in a couple of years, like nothing. So that was, and then also the Guardian, the British newspaper, the year that Avant finally went bust, they have a huge online audience, massive online audience, and they made a 63 million pound loss that year. So I was like, well, if they can't monetize, being online, then we've got no hope. So so the whole thing went under, but I got no regrets about it. It was a good learning curve, and I suffered in a very different way to the way that I suffered in Antarctica. But man, I think we had 12 people at one point, 12 staff, and I had to fire them all. And we had a young guy doing digital stuff, website, social media, and I can't remember if he was married, but he had a partner, and she was pregnant, and I remember him sort of telling me that he was enjoying his job, and just to hear how happy he was that he could support his family. I was like, and then a few weeks later I had to fire him. Like, it was so tough. So it was a good learning curve.
Well, I mean, Laura and I always say there's no such thing really as failure. It's just gathering information. You're just learning from it. But look, I am conscious of timing because we're taking up a fair bit of your time. But I want to ask this question around. It's come up in like on the periphery and the edges every now and then, talking about sort of, I suppose, ego, about media, publicity, and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Can I ask your opinion on the you know where I'm going already, I think, with this question. Look at that nod. You know where I'm going with this. I'm fascinated by this, with the whole the race that happened last year, crazy. Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting. So that, I mean, that is,
you got to let people in.
We probably need to let people in. Okay, so
like, I would have no clue if I didn't live with you. Although in America, it is big news.
Not in the last Antarctic summer, but the summer before that, there was a race that occurred between a Brit, Lou Rudd, and an American, Colin O'Brady. And it captured the media's attention like no other. And like you touched on it before, talking about your trip, and like, you did get some media, but it wasn't crazy. But that trip, really, the media were like biting at the bit. You know, they're going crazy. It was like Sharks in the
York
Water with
Times,
Blood, the
didn't
New
they?
York Times, National Geographic, and then
Conan
the
O'Brien,
fallout
was
after it. I think like all the shows, like in Joe Rogan podcast, this, that, the other. It was big. And I just wanted to get your take on it. Like, what was the British take on it, I suppose?
Yeah, it's
Is it because
interesting.
Americans never leave their country? So when one did, everyone's like, "Whoa, can't believe this."
Yeah, it's it's an interesting one. And I until now, I've basically stayed out of it. Like I haven't publicly commented, so I'm gonna have to try and be diplomatic here. But
obviously, yeah, please be.
Gosh, but yeah, it turned into a race, and kind of rewinding slightly to the year before when I was down there, like that was one of the things that contributed to my decision to stop at the pole. I mean, the story was I was running low on food, which I was slightly, but I could have, you know, if I was willing to take a bit of risk, could have got down the Lyric Glacier. But I realised that the expedition had this sort of weird trajectory where I started from Birkner Island, which is like an unusual place to start from. Very few people have done that. And it's got, like, early on the route, you go up this ridge, and I've heard it pronounced several different ways. So Wujek or Vujek or Vujek, or who knows, Wujek. But it's this crazy, like, steep, it's basically a day's climb up this steep snow slope with a few crevasses, and it's just pretty sketchy, and you have to shuttle loads, and I had a really windy cold day when I went up it, and it was really tough. And then you have about a week, 2 weeks sort of going along this beautiful valley. I forget the mountains, the Forrestal Range maybe, but just stunning scenery. And for me, there was like the knowledge that the last human being to have stood there was Henry Worsley, like 2 years previously. So there was it had this real kind of meaning and significance. And then you get out of the mountains onto the plateau, and it's the plateau really, and tons of sastrugi, and it was just kind of familiar terrain. And then I got to the pole, and I just remember thinking, like, this is going to be such a massive anticlimax, like following the road, following the marker posts down the glacier, you know, to finish at this like arbitrary like edge of the Ross Ice Shelf. It's just going to be this huge anticlimax. So actually, wouldn't it be better to stop at the South Pole? Because I've skied solo to the North Pole, so it'll be both poles solo. You know, everyone's a winner. So that was kind of my decision making. I remember thinking this is going to be a real anticlimax, and I'd rather not do it. I'd rather end at the South Pole. And then fast forward to the next season, and Colin and Lou both went down there and kind of changed the route again. So they both started. I think they were both the Messner start rather than Hercules Inlet. I think Messner start, but they basically chose like the shortest possible route. And what was interesting was that they were both still, I think, kind of slightly milking the Henry Worsley thing, like he died trying to make this thing, no one's ever done it, we're gonna, you know, but none of their route, apart from maybe the South Pole, actually overlapped with Henry's original route. Like it was a completely different sort of dogleg plan, and in some ways it was sort of an exercise in like how low can you make the goalposts and still fit this you know peculiar set of definitions that actually there's no governing body, there's no like Olympic association for there's none of that for polar expeditions, and there's all this sort of confusing semantics like unsupported, unassisted, like what does that all mean? So I think what frustrated me certainly with Colin was the sort of hyperbole, like, you know, positioning this as a what he did as a sort of pioneering feat of endurance. Yeah, when it was you know just over half the distance that Charles and I walked, and a lot of, you know, the sort of on his website and social media, you know, the sort of the temperatures and things, which everything was like exaggerated. He was apparently pulling 180 kilos. Like, why the hell was he dragging that much for a relatively short trip? Like, what has he got wrong? Like, how, you know, or is that not true? Like, there was just a lot about it that confused me. So yeah, it was an interesting one, really.
Do you think this is a symptom of the era of social media where, you know, like your Instagram page is your highlight reel? Do you think that's coming into adventure, and adventure was never supposed to almost be about that? Is that what bugs you the most? Like, because this really gets under Justin's skin, and I try to figure out.
I get frustrated because it seems there was elements that were disingenuous about that. And like, and I think what it did for me is it was a
because he did do a hard thing.
Oh no, don't get me wrong. He did a hard trip
Well,
and stuff like that.
exactly. Like all credit to him. It was a tough camping trip. Like but it wasn't. It didn't really raise the bar in any sense. And a lot of it was disingenuous. The whole like, oh well, we decided to fly out together as like a a team. They basically shared a twin otter back to Union Glacier. And his his take on it was that it was all about sort of. Whatever you call it, sort of teamwork, and we're in it together. And Lou and I were, celebrating the finish line. They shared a flight because that's the way ALE would do it, and they split the cost. Yeah,
it's cost effective. You save. I don't know how much it is, but you save a bit of money.
It's not because you're being a gentleman about it. You're just splitting the cost. Like that's how it works.
Well, and if you really wanted to be a gentleman,
you wouldn't do an 80K dash to finish before the other person.
And that's what Gammy did. He waited. Like he actually shared the world record.
Yeah.
Like that. That's being. If you really don't care about being the first, then that's a different one.
That was one of the all-time most impressive, like polar. I don't know what to call it. Feats. It just like having that sort of wow, like to completely sidestep your own ego and just be that cool. Just brilliant.
I think that's when my motivation changed. When I saw what he did and the pressure he was under, and like to him just let go of that ego, and I was like, wow, I've got to be like Alex. Like for a while I used to say that. It's just like, be like Alex, basically.
It has changed how and why you adventure and how you think about it.
It definitely does. I mean, I think about the collective rather than myself. So it definitely has a huge impact on me. But yeah, no, the Colin and Lou stuff aside, I mean, like it was interesting to see for the first time though. What I did like was that it became mainstream. Like it hasn't become mainstream like that since back in Scott's days, basically. I mean, really, it was in the papers, it was in everything. So, and I think that almost in a way paved the way for this is going to be a weird thing to say, and maybe I'm completely wrong, but the Dawn Wall, adventure was in the forefront of people's minds, and I think that does actually help in a country like America, which hosts, the Oscars and all that sort of stuff. And so the time is changing. I don't think Dawn Wall was the best movie actually that it's ever been made about, adventure film, but it was just the right time and it had the right publicity and the right media kind of behind it. But anyway, I digress.
But then Free Solo comes and...
Free Solo, sorry. Yeah. I'm getting mixed up. My bad. Free Solo, sorry. Yeah. Dawn Wall's way better. That's why I'm thinking about it. Because I enjoyed that film better.
Dawn Wall's a really good film.
Cracker film. Yeah, Dawn Wall's so much better. Anyway, shouldn't say that. Anyway, I am getting...
Do you want me to do a quick...
Okay, you do your little quick summary, and then we'll do a couple little quick questions, then we should wrap it up, because I'm sure Ben has something to do.
Ben probably has better things to do than...
Yeah, it's actually... it's lunchtime, past lunchtime. So
my bad.
I'll keep this quick, but I think I'll just pull out a couple of things that you said, which, I mean, for me, I think that managing failure is easier than managing success, and really success is not about the end goal, it's about the journey. And that going through, that anticlimax and sense of loss when you've achieved what you had set out to do and now what, I think was a really interesting kind of analysis. It's something that happens all the time in real life because sometimes our achievements or our success are defined by other people. And thank you for sharing about your dad too. I mean, I think that is true that, we achieve great things typically out of struggle. You don't jump out of a really warm bath often. It typically has to be uncomfortable to want to move. I did actually, I'll finish this and then I do have one quick question about, you talked about success and you said that you met your dad later in life. Did that turn out in the successful way you had hoped? Did I catch that part of the story?
It was interesting. So he, I must have told someone that I was I hadn't had any contact with Dad. I had no idea if he was alive or dead. And they said, "Oh, have you have you tried the Salvation Army? And I was like, the what? And it turns out they have this sort of wonderfully antiquated, group of volunteers that trace missing family members. And it's all really old school. You have to sort of write in and send either a check or a postal order, which I don't even know. I've never even done that in my life. Like, with a sort of optional donation of like £10 or something. And I'm just sort of sending the letter in with all the details I knew about him, and thinking, well, he's probably dead. He'll be in his 70s. He smoked a lot. He had a pretty hard life, and it'll take months. Anyway, like a week later, had this letter back saying, we've made contact with your father, and here's his address, and he would love to hear from you. So I wrote him a letter, and he wrote one back, and we basically agreed to meet. And this was the summer before Taka and I went to Antarctica. And I remember a conversation with my brother years before that. He lives in Switzerland in the Alps, and he's a couple of years younger than me, but far more grown up. He's got 2 kids. He's married. He's had a sensible job for years, and he said, and he's an awesome dad. He's like the ultimate dad. He's got 2 really outdoorsy kids. They just ski the whole time, mountain bike, all this kind of stuff. Just lovely little kids, and he kind of puts them first, and he's a brilliant dad. And he said to me at the time that the fact that we'd had, both our biological father and our stepdad as pretty poor male role models kind of inspired him to be a really good dad. And he worried that actually finding our dad and kind of making peace with him that he would lose that
he would
fire,
achieve success,
that motivation. Yeah. So suddenly when I found out he was alive and I had his address, I was like, oh shit, is this going to mean I'm going to go to Antarctica with like no motivation? I'm just going to be totally at peace with things. So it kind of felt like a risky move going to go meet him. And he suggested a church in Plymouth where he last lived. So he was still in the same city. And I remember thinking, oh, I hope he's not, and apologies if you guys are religious, I'm not religious. And I was like, oh, I hope he's not some like evangelical, kind of born again. But actually he chose the church because he was a bricklayer. He was a builder. And that was the last building he worked on before he retired. So we met up and we basically just talked like all day. And it was really cathartic because I think I'd been quite angry at him for years and years and years. And, that if he is alive, how come he hasn't made contact? And actually, I kind of saw it all from his perspective for the first time. And I won't bore you with the whole story, but it was super cathartic. But then I had this sort of weird dilemma for a few years where I knew my dad, but I didn't know him. He was alive, and I had his phone number, and he's also it's almost like we're from different universes. He I think he's left the UK. He actually died this summer, but I think he'd left the UK twice his entire life on like package holidays, one to Greece, one to Tenerife. I don't think he'd ever been to London. And meanwhile, like last year, I had 50-something flights, like almost once a week. I've been, I was working down in between Cape Town and Antarctica last season. I flew into Antarctica with my wife on a private jet. Like we had a helicopter through. Like my life and his life couldn't be more different. So we just, beyond like DNA, we had so little in common, and there was just no relationship. I just had never known this guy. So that was really challenging. And then he fell ill earlier this year, and I was talking about my brother in Switzerland, couldn't get back. So it's when lockdown happened in the UK. And my brother's trying to find out what hospital he was in, because he never had an email account. I don't think he ever used the internet. He never had a mobile phone. So he was like a hard guy to pin down. We had like a landline.
Had he heard about what you had done, given you are kind
of... that was one of the craziest things when I went to go and see him for the first time. He had like this biscuit tin with like newspaper cuttings, and I was like, it was,
because that's what you said when you were a kid. That's what drove you, is almost to be seen.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, he didn't get it at all. He was like, "Well, why the hell would you want to do that kind of thing?" He was so.
I'm with him a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and he'd been a manual laborer. Like he just the idea of like follow your dreams was just completely alien language to him. So that was pretty cool actually. I was like, okay. Dad's proud of me. Tick that box. but yeah, so he fell. He had lung cancer and fell ill this year, and my brother and I were trying to find which hospital he was in. And I finally found the hospital, found the ward, couldn't talk to him. He was too ill, but I spoke to the nurse, and she's like, well, as you're his only immediate family, like, you'd be welcome to visit. And then I was like, shit, like, we're in lockdown, like it's a respiratory pandemic, and he's in a respiratory ward. That's quite scary. So I had to like man up and go into the respiratory ward in like peak COVID. And he never remarried, but he did live for the last decade with he had a lady called Maureen, and she was a widow already, and just one of the most stoic people I've ever met. And she was there when I got to the hospital, and she said, look, don't be offended if he doesn't want to see you, because he doesn't want to see me right now. And they've been living together for a decade. So, and sure enough, he didn't want to see me. And I think it was, and this might be an interesting point to sort of end on, because I think it was sheer pride and stubbornness. Like, he didn't want anyone to see him, weak and afraid and struggling. And so I think, this kind of comes back to grit. Like, I think there's definitely power to be and magic to be found in the ability to like keep going when things get genuinely hard. But I think there's also a time to to ask for help and to actually be open to people that care about you, and just like how tragic that he couldn't do that at the very end. So yeah, it's been a poignant few months. But no, like I did everything I could. Like I drove for a couple of hours going to go. Found the hospital, found him, went to go and see him. So yeah, it's all gonna be in the book at some point.
Ben, seriously, thank you for sharing that. I mean, that's really, we feel very special that you're willing to do that. So you mentioned a book. I mean, how can people follow you, catch up with you, see what you're doing, stay in contact?
Yeah, good question. Well, we've talked about the sort of pros and cons of social media, and I'm a reluctant Instagrammer, and definitely like being an influencer wasn't even a thing when I started out. But social media is probably the best thing. I'm Polar Ben on Twitter and Instagram. bensaunders.com is my website, which desperately needs updating. So keep your eye on all of those.
And the Grit Academy, people can join in.
And the Grit Academy.
That's very relevant right now with people that are really struggling.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think this is for and again, it's hard to talk about this without descending to cliche, like challenging times. But this is a really weird. Like I love. There's a charity in the UK called Speakers for Schools. So I do all the talks for basic state schools that have zero budget for speakers, and of course all of that's been online recently. And I love talking to school kids. And I said to them a few weeks ago, I was like, I'm 43 now, which is pretty ancient, and I've never lived through anything this weird. So I think it's like something that is affecting every single human being right now, which is unique, and massive challenges, but kind of massive opportunities. And I think like more than ever, it's kind of making it through this is going to pivot on your ability to sort of keep yourself motivated when everything around you is going to shit. So so hopefully this is useful, helpful stuff that I'm sharing with people. So learngrit.com.
And per your definition of adventure, I mean, COVID definitely ticks it, because it's something new for everyone. Just like you said, you haven't been, none of us have really experienced this. So I feel like we're pivoting and we're changing and we're surviving and we're thriving at different times in different ways.
Absolutely.
It's definitely that first step.
And one of the things, the sorts of trips that we've all done kind of teach you is you're trying to achieve a goal in an environment where so many factors are completely outside your control. So you learn very quickly, hopefully, to focus on the things you can change and not waste too much energy, physically, mentally, emotionally on the things that you can't change. And it's so easy right now to spend way too much time looking at headlines and social media and stuff that we individually can't really affect all that much, but that can become sort of all consuming. So control the controllables, I guess.
It's another pearl. I have so many. We can put them up and we can rehash after we let Ben go. But do you want to do the final question?
Yeah, the very final question.
It is almost
It's
11:17. This is the latest I've been up.
Yeah,
long
you guys.
PM.
My
you're
bedtime
starving.
story backfired. I've been waffling on way too long.
No,
It's been great. It's been really, really special, and we feel really
It's been
honored
one of
to
my
have you.
favorite conversations by far, and you have such amazing, brilliant tidbits that I'm going to put in a little something because there's so many. Yeah, start before you're ready. Confidence follows courage. Imposter syndrome. It doesn't mean you're in the wrong place. You're the right place. There's a couple. Go, Justin.
Okay, final question, Ben, is that one thing we like to ask everyone who's on this show is basically, who would you want to hear from? Who would you want to learn from? So who should we put in the hot seat? Who's another adventure thinker out there that would be good to grill on the spot?
I've got a very random one.
Taka Yosa.
No idea if he'd be up for it. He's my my sort of Obi-Wan Kenobi. So American guy called Jerry Colonna, Colonna. And we met through a mutual friend. Well, at that point, he was an acquaintance. Someone I met at TED 2005, and I was in like desperate fundraising, sponsorship raising mode, and they were like, "Oh, Jerry's made some money, and he's been to Greenland and loves adventure stuff. So maybe he might be interested in sponsoring you if for example he can be on the Twin Otter that drops you off at the start this was for the North Pole." So they put me in touch with Jerry, and he at that point was just starting to work as a coach, which is a kind of really cliched term, and he's definitely not a life coach, but he was a very successful venture capitalist in sort of tech, early stage investing, based in New York with a guy called Fred Wilson, who's still very active in that space. So he kind of had the huge success in business, but then had a bit of a breakdown, and I won't ruin his story, but he's just written a wonderful book called Reboot. And I think the full title is Reboot, Leadership and the Art of Growing Up. A brilliant book. But he, interestingly, I then landed a sponsor, so I never actually asked him for money. But he was kind of doing coaching work, and he agreed to take me on as a kind of client. And I remember thinking like, oh, brilliant! Here's a guy who's made a shit ton of money. He can help me make loads of money from it. And actually, we almost never talked about commercial business stuff, deals, and it was very quickly like really, really deep personal stuff. And he's now a very good friend. He gave a wonderful speech came over to my wedding in 2018. He is one of the wisest human beings I know, and a proper mentor in every sense of the word. So very, very cool guy. And he's written this book. The book came out earlier this year, I think.
Check it out.
So I can hook you guys up. But he's a adventurous thinker in every sense of the word, and someone who has taught me a lot and inspired me greatly. So I think he'd be fascinating.
Fantastic. No, love the suggestion left of center, because that's I think the best conversations. And he sounds like the perfect person to actually live down in Antarctica for a season down in that valley of yours.
Yeah, maybe he'll get his trip.
He's just bought an extraordinary house in Boulder, Colorado. So he's just teasing me with like his views of the mountains, and he's definitely outdoorsy, but he's not, he hasn't broken any records, nor would he want to, but he is adventurous, that's for sure.
Excellent.
Well,
Ben, thank you so much. We'll ask you just to stay on just for a second, just while we quickly wrap up with the off screen. But this has been an epic chat, and honestly, like you're one of the people that I look up to, and I always kind of try and follow what you're doing, and it's cool. The tenacity that you've had on your trips has been pretty phenomenal. So
thank you guys. Well,
really special.
the feeling is mutual. Like the bromance goes both ways.
Maybe
sorry.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna drop.
I'm still here.
No, I'm dropping Lauren out.
Hey,
Ben,
hey guys.
It's just gonna be. Hold on.
This is awkward. I'm like a three. Hey.
No, there we go. Hi.
Yeah.
It's just us. It's just us now. We're alone.
We already did this on Instagram a few weeks ago. Like we just, that was a long chat.
Get out of the picture, Lauren.
No, I'm still on the couch, Ben. I'm still here.
All right, I will drop you off.
Let's go to the south of France and have some wine. That would be really
done.
That would be the adventure I'd want to do next with you and Pip.
All right, we'll catch you later, Ben. We'll talk to you in a second. But Laura and I will just wrap up
Thank you
very
so much.
quickly. Wow. Okay, I've got to change that over. That's always gets the wrong one, Lauren. I'm always on the wrong setting.
But
There we go.
we can cut this, yeah?
Yeah, we can.
Okay.
But still, I think it's quite funny when it doesn't work like that because every single time I press the wrong button. Every single time.
Tech fail.
Anyway, how cool was that? Ben Saunders. He's
Thanks,
such
Ben.
a legend. Absolute legend.
Are we still live? No?
We are still
Oh,
live.
okay.
Yeah, so we're just quickly saying, well, we don't know who's going to be on next
Yeah,
week.
this
'cause
is our
not-
non-live one, so this
not-
can go anytime, any place.
It
How
probably
exciting.
will come out in about 3 weeks' time, but that's irrelevant to you people
One of
who
my
are watching it right
favorite
now.
conversations, honestly. What a cool guy. I'm going to do the Grit Academy and
Learn
yeah.
some grit.
learn some grit.
Okay,
Get a
so
little tougher.
we will catch you very soon for the next episode. Stoked. And again, thank you so much to Ben Saunders. That was absolutely brilliant. Catch you later.
Oh my god, that's our
That's epic. Hold on, Ben.
that's our longest